Hello and welcome to the Big Five podcast from Northumbria Psychology Department. My name is Dr. Genevieve Brown, and I'll be your guide into the minds of psychology students, alumni, and researchers at Northumbria University. I'm a lecturer in the psychology department, and my research focuses on how people use technology like cell phones and social media to connect with one another. Each week on this podcast, I'll speak to a guest who is either a student, alumni, or researcher at the Northumbria Psychology Department. By asking them 5 big questions, we'll learn about their experience studying psychology and hopefully learn some big facts about human behavior and experience. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to my guest, Dr. Mark Moss, who is the head of the Department for Psychology at Northumbria University and has been with Northumbria University for almost 30 years now. He's a founding member of the Brain Performance and Nutrition Research Center at Northumbria University, and his current research focuses on cognition and aromatics. We're very excited to speak to you today, Dr. Mark Moss. Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thanks. Nice to talk to you.
All right, Mark, let's jump right into it with our first of our 5 big questions. What's the theory behind your research, and why did you become interested in this topic?
Okay, so I'll take you back a little bit actually, to before I was interested in what I'm doing now. Go back to the days of my PhD. I've always been interested in how the brain works from a biological level, and how that relates to our cognition, our memory, our attention, and things like that. And for my PhD, I got interested in the idea that for many, many years, humans have rather taken a superior attitude that we have evolved to be working optimally in the environment that we're in, and our brain's as good as it can be, and this sort of thing. And I took the approach that the brain is really, really energy greedy in terms of our body. It's only about 5% of our body mass, but it uses at rest about 20% of our energy. And all of that energy is effectively used for cognitive processing, our thoughts, our memories, and things like that. So I thought that we're living in an atmosphere of 21% oxygen. What happens if actually you up that level of oxygen to the brain? Because oxygen is required to burn glucose in the brain to provide the energy for all of the neurons to work and the thoughts and the memories to happen. So my PhD looked at that, and we gave people pure oxygen to breathe while doing a range of different cognitive tasks. And we found that there were improvements on some of them, particularly those related to memory. And we suggested that that's because laying down memories is actually quite energetic. It's effortful. It requires quite a lot of energy in the brain. So you provide a bit more oxygen, the brain can burn a bit more glucose, give a bit more energy, and perform a bit better. And that was my PhD. And that I found a really interesting set of studies. But one thing that was happening at the time that I was doing my PhD that we found really interesting was that around the world there was a craze for oxygen bars being set up, particularly in inner cities, where people would go into these oxygen bars. They'd strap on a little nasal cannula and they would breathe pure oxygen for 5 minutes or something like that, and then they would leave and go about their business. And talking to the people who were coming out of these bars, they'd say, oh, it's great, it makes me feel like this, it really makes me feel lively, or it calms me, or all these very different changes in mood state going along with the breathing of the oxygen. And we found that particularly interesting because in none of our research did we actually find anybody reporting changes in their self-reported mood as a consequence of breathing the oxygen. So we thought, well, how's that happening? People are going into these places and they're breathing oxygen, and then they're reporting feelings that we've not found scientifically. And it struck me at the time, looking at these oxygen bars and what have you, is when people go into these oxygen bars, they don't just breathe pure oxygen. They get a choice of flavored oxygen that they can breathe. And this made a lot of sense for the people who were running the oxygen bars, of course, because as I said, when you breathe pure oxygen for a short period of time, you don't actually feel any different. So if you just gave people pure oxygen to breathe, they wouldn't even know they were breathing pure oxygen. And so that you would probably not be able to sell it for very long, because people would say, hang on a minute, how do I know this is oxygen? You're just talking me up to a bloody pipe of air. And so they used the flavors so that people could go in and say, oh, I want peppermint today, or oh, I want lavender today, or chamomile, or whatever. And that made me start to think, well, hang on a minute, maybe the effects that people are feeling about their moods are a consequence of the aroma that's added to the oxygen that's making them feel slightly different rather than the oxygen itself. And so that then led on, or coincided very nicely with an undergraduate student coming to see me and saying, I know you're interested in cognitive enhancement and trying to get people's brains to work better. I said, yes. She said, well, I'm interested in aromas. I'm interested in particularly rosemary. And I said, oh, interesting. Don't really know anything about rosemary at all, but let's have a look and see what there is. And so I started just having a look around at aroma and the impacts of aroma on mood and cognition. And there's a small existing literature in the area that people had been doing. And then I looked at the sort of history of rosemary as a herb and its purported properties. And it goes back all the way to, well, as long as we've had written records, really. Ancient Egyptians used rosemary in memorial services. Ancient Greeks used rosemary as an enhancement for learning. When they were taking exams, they would wear garlands of rosemary around their heads.
Interesting.
Assist them with their studies. Then you get to things like Shakespeare in Hamlet, Act 4, Scene 5, where there's the phrase from Ophelia where she opines, "There's rosemary, that's for remembrance." And I start to think, bloody hell, if it's got into sort of Shakespeare, you know, it's kind of like this must have been something that was clearly well known about at the time. You know, he didn't just sort of pluck it out of the air. And all of the ancient sort of herbal texts have rosemary in, and they say it's for enlivening the brain, for energizing the brain, and these sorts of things. It's like, blimey, you know, this is something that goes back a long, long way, but there's not really much in the way of research into it. And so that's what got me into sort of phytoaromatic research. It was, I have to say, it was largely down to an undergraduate student, Jenny Cook, who set me down the road. But we conducted her undergraduate project, first of all, where we used a computerized battery of cognitive tests that's been very widely used in psychopharmacological research over the years and was provided by a collaborator of mine. We had students come in and they either did this battery of tests in a cubicle that had rosemary aroma infused.
So how do you get the rosemary scent delivered to participants? And do you use real rosemary? Do you use rosemary oils? How exactly does the methodology of these studies work?
Yeah, so, well, just about all of them I've used aroma. It's not all of them. I have actually used fresh rosemary that's been eaten and things like that in some stuff. But generally, I use the essential oil of rosemary, and then I just diffuse it into the test cubicle using a standard fan diffuser that you can buy off the shelf. So all of this stuff there's no special equipment for getting the rosemary in there. And so, yeah, and then they just complete these computerized tests and mood scales, and off they go. And we have one group in a rosemary cubicle, another group in a lavender cubicle. Now, we chose lavender because in the same way that rosemary has a historic reputation for being invigorating, lavender has probably an even stronger historic reputation for being sedative. And you go around the world and you'll find that grandmothers around the world will have lavender scented pillows on their beds and things like that. And it's associated with sedation and sleep and that sort of thing. So we thought, well, if rosemary is going to have an effect in one direction, perhaps lavender will have an effect in the other direction. So it made a good comparison aroma. And then we had another group of participants who completed the tests in a cubicle with no aroma in there. Brings about one nice sort of, one of my favorite bits of doing some of this sort of research as well, really, around the way that we conduct it. Because one of the problems, of course, with aromas is that you can smell them as soon as you go into the cubicle. It's sort of like you can't have it. You can't be blind directly to the study, as it were, because the aroma's there. So how do we get around the fact that the cubicles are sometimes full of this aroma? And the only way that we could think of getting around it was just downright lying to our participants. So in the first studies that we did, we said we were simply trying to validate this cognitive testing system on the computer. That worked quite well. And if anybody said, "No, there's smell in this cubicle," we simply said, "I don't know what that is. Somebody was in here doing something earlier. It's got nothing to do with us." So a good old psychological, methodological trick of deceiving your participants about what you're doing. But it's the only way that you can realistically do it, because by the nature of them being aromas, you can't have an aroma that's not an aroma and still have it there. We found that there were small beneficial effects of inhaling rosemary aroma while doing particularly the tasks of memory. And interestingly, there are also small decrements in performance as a consequence of lavender as well. So rosemary does have a beneficial effect on memory. And that was our very first study that we looked at rosemary many years ago now.
Very interesting. Surprising that just an odor in the air can really have an effect on our cognitive performance. I wouldn't have expected that. My next big question is, what is the most exciting or surprising thing that's come out of this program of research? Because as you said, that was your first study. I know you've done studies since then. Mm-hmm. So is there something really shocking or surprising that you found during your research?
Well, there's two things I think that are perhaps some of the most exciting and interesting. And first of all, you just said that you'd be surprised that a smell in the aroma in the atmosphere might affect our cognitive processing. And it's like, yeah, well, that is a very interesting point. And so that sort of leads to the question of, well, if it is having this effect, why is it having an effect? What is it about it? And so this brings around 2 or 3 potential explanations, really. First of all, there is the fact that these smells are smells. They have olfactory properties, and our olfactory system, based at the back of our nose, not surprisingly, is a very, very complex system. Interestingly, it's also very evolutionarily ancient. It is the oldest of our senses. Olfaction is the most basic way for even single cell organisms to identify food that they might want to move towards or danger that they might want to move away from by the detection of very small quantities of compounds in their environment, which is what our noses can do. We often think that our noses aren't very sensitive, but they are in fact very, very sensitive, and it takes very little of various different molecules in the air for us to actually be able to smell them and detect them, and indeed to differentiate between many of them. So it is really quite a sensitive system. It's also massively integrated throughout the brain. So although there's the olfactory bulb at the back of the nose, and there's the identification of smells and things like that, innovations, projections from the olfactory bulb spread out to many, many different centers in the brain. And when we smell something, you get lights going on all over the brain. There's lots and lots of different things that aromas do in terms of activating the brain. So it's possible that particular aromas of particular types might just happen to energize the right bits of the brain in the right way to affect memory. Now, it's possible, but to me, it didn't seem that was perhaps the most likely. I think that those projections and those connections are far more linked to the way that we deal with different aromas in terms of their usefulness, the recognition of things that are good, bad, indifferent, and also perhaps the way that smells can actually instigate the recall of memories within us. So if we smell something that reminds us of years passed and that sort of thing. But it's interesting that the olfactory system is very, very complex indeed. But that's one possible explanation. A second possible explanation is quite simply expectancy. So participants expect the aroma to do something to their performance, and so they behave in a way that they think they should. So you smell lavender, you think, oh, lavender, that goes on your pillow on your bed, so that's going to make me sleepy. I'm not going to be very good. Rosemary, oh, that's supposed to be invigorating. I'm going to be better. But that didn't particularly wash with me, because actually we found that most of our participants hadn't got a clue what the aroma actually was. They didn't recognize the aromas, and they certainly didn't know what the aroma was supposed to do. So we did studies where we manipulated expectancy as well, where we actually told them that they were going into a room of aroma that was likely to slow them down or to speed them up or to make them perform better. And we found that irrespective of what the aroma was, you could, to some extent, to some small degrees, manipulate the people's performance by changing their expectancy. But most people haven't got an expectancy before they come in. So I didn't really think it was that. The thing that really engaged me, and it was because it took me back to the sort of the biological roots that I was originally sort of coming from, was the idea that, well, these aromas, they are full of small volatile compounds that are the things that actually give the aroma. They are small little organic compounds that just float around in the air. They give the aroma its particular properties. But because they are small little organic compounds, if you are inhaling this stuff in the same way as you might be inhaling nicotine or something when you're smoking, these molecules could get absorbed through the lungs and into the bloodstream. Did a bit of digging around and found that some people had done animal work to demonstrate that this was actually the case, that if you put mice in a cage with rosemary aroma in there, then they see that the mice are a little bit more active while the rosemary aroma is in there. And then if you take blood out of the mice, you can see that there are some of these compounds in the blood of the mice, and that the amount that they move around correlates with the amount of the compounds in the blood. So it seems that there is this sort of biological link. And one of the most prevalent compounds in rosemary aroma is something called 1,8-cineol. It's also known as eucalyptol. It's that sort of eucalyptus kind of smell. And that's a really good marker for absorption, because there's quite a lot of it in the aroma. And so if that's being absorbed, then there's probably a good chance that other things are as well. And so we did a study where we actually took blood samples from our participants at the end of a range of cognitive tasks following exposure to aroma, and then sent it off for analysis for this 1,8-cineol to see if it was actually in the blood of the individuals. And got the results back, and yes, 1,8-cineol had been absorbed by these people, and also the amount that had been absorbed correlated with their performance on the task. So the more that they'd absorbed, the better they were doing on the tasks. So that was really, really interesting. Then had to go back to some more sort of basic biochemical science and identified that people had been doing a fair bit of sort of basic science work on some of these compounds in not just rosemary, but a range of different herbs, plants, and whatever. And importantly, what they found was that 1,8-cineol and another number of other compounds in rosemary essential oil are pharmacologically active. They actually interact with neurotransmitter systems in the brain. And the one that they interact with the most is the cholinergic system. Acetylcholine, neurotransmitter in the brain, is fundamental for memory processing. We know how important it is for memory processing because it is the cholinergic system that is massively depleted in dementia. And there is obviously a very strong association between dementia and memory. All of the major dementia drugs that are currently used are cholinergic drugs. They boost the cholinergic system to try and redress that balance. And here are compounds in rosemary that actually actively work on that system as well.
So, would you say that that is perhaps one of the most important impacts that this research might have, that could be applied, some of these natural compounds that we can easily find in the environment, like rosemary or eucalyptus, could be used to help aid memory, but also perhaps aid in treatment for early dementia?
Yeah, well, I mean, my general perspective is based on what might become termed the idea of self-care. The effects that we find for rosemary aren't huge. We're not finding the cure for dementia or anything like that. But there's a possible usefulness in terms of self-care throughout the lifespan to maintain activity, enhance activity in certain neurotransmitter systems, just a little bit. It's possible that an intervention that's used over the long term might in some way be protective against cognitive decline in later life. And so, yeah, that could be something that could really come out of this kind of research. What I do find interesting as well, and I think this is an important element. So I said that there are a number of different compounds that have this activity that work on the cholinergic system, enhance the cholinergic system, as it were. I'm a great believer in these effects of rosemary aren't down to one particular compound, though. So we measured 1,8-cineol because it's probably the easiest one for us to measure. But there are many different compounds. And I think that there's a synergistic effect here. So you need the many different compounds in the right ratios to have a beneficial effect. Now, something that supports this particular angle is that somebody else working somewhere did a study where they actually took 1,8-cineol as the pure compound and said, right, well, if that's an active compound, that might be the thing. So let's do some research. Let's look at rosemary. Let's look at 1,8-cineol. No effect, no beneficial effect of 1,8-cineol as a single compound at all, but a benefit for rosemary. So that supports the idea that it's not just a question of, right, well, let's just isolate a compound and expect that that's going to have the effect. What that does do, though, is it brings about a massive challenge. As soon as you start talking about synergistic effects, it's like, well, what's the best combination then? It's like absolutely no idea at the moment. There's a wealth of research that could be done in that area. But yeah, I think that there's a potential opportunity for people to resort to nature as perhaps the first port of call, and indeed prior to the identification of a problem. So this self-care idea is that, you know, you look after yourself as you're going through life rather than waiting for something to break down to then try and have it repaired. And there's a study that we're doing at the moment, actually, that the data collection is just coming to an end now, that relates to this. And this is a study that was funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, where we have recruited a group of women who are just going through the menopause transition. And the reason that we're doing this piece of work is that women going through the menopause transition often report something that is generally described as brain fog, that they find that their memory is challenged, their attentional capacities are not as good as they used to be. And so this particular piece of research I'm doing with an occupational psychologist colleague of mine from Lancaster, who she was interested in the menopause because it's often a period of a woman's working life where they find particular challenges. So at a time when they should perhaps be looking for the next step in terms of progress, promotion, etc., they suddenly find that they are challenged with this brain fog that goes on for a period of typically around about 5-6 months, but sometimes up to 2 years.
Wow.
Which massively knocks their occupational confidence, their belief that they are able to do a really good job, and their opportunities for promotion. And so we thought, well, perhaps there's something we could do here with rosemary in terms of a self-care intervention against this sort of brain fog. So we've got that going on now. And I mean, if we found that there were some beneficial effects there, that could be a really, really useful, helpful thing for half the population of the world. Yeah. Given that, you know, half the population of the world are going to experience the menopause at some time in their life, and so may suffer from this brain fog.
Yeah, and that's a really simple solution that could have huge impact in women's lives.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's something that they can do, that they can engage with as they wish. Because something else that actually came out of talking to a lot of participants as well was they hate the way that the menopause is medicalized, as though it is, an illness, a problem, you know, as opposed to a natural state of life. And so, you know, the idea that that it's a medical problem that they find difficult. And so, you know, the opportunity to perhaps democratize the menopause. And so it's not something that, oh, I'm ill, I'm at fault or whatever, there's something wrong with me. And it's more that I've reached this phase of my life and I'm going to behave in this particular way. Or another study that we did a couple of years ago, again, you know, talked about sort of top cognitive decline. And we took a group of healthy elderly participants who didn't report any cognitive decline at all, but we assessed them on their prospective memory. Now, prospective memory is remembering to do things in the future, remembering to remember, as it were. And my best example of it is you leave the house with a letter in your pocket that you're going to post at the post box on your way to work. You get home in the evening, you've still got the letter in your pocket.
Mine's remembering to take out my trash cans every week on the right day.
That sort of thing. It's remembering to remember, and it's something that we often find failings in. They tend to be trivial but annoying, like forgetting to take your trash out on the right day and forgetting to post a letter and this sort of thing. But we ran the study and found that rosemary also enhanced prospective memory in these healthy elderly people who weren't reporting any problems. And so there's, again, these opportunities for this sort of self-care approach to, well, I'll just, you know, occasionally I'll just diffuse a bit of aroma around the house, and it might just help with those sorts of things as well. Just keep you on top of your game, as it were, as opposed to thinking, well, I'm gonna sniff some rosemary and I'm suddenly going to be a genius. No, you're not. That's not going to happen. But it might be a question of just keeping you around the top of your game as you proceed through your life. It could be helpful in that regard.
Yeah, so just one last question, I guess. Where do you hope to go from here? Are you hoping to continue specifically with rosemary? Are you interested in any other aromas that might be useful for cognition, or any other specific applications of rosemary?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different things that are always sort of on back burners and sometimes come nearer to the front burner, as it were. With regard to rosemary, one thing that I am really interested in is trying to identify this synergistic effect, trying to get a number of different essential oils, get them analyzed for their constituent makeup, compare their effectiveness on a range of different tests, and see if we can sort of get to a situation where it's like, yeah, you need this kind of combination of compounds in these volumes to appear to get the best effects. I think that would be a very useful step in the right direction, because otherwise you're always fishing around a little bit in the dark, in that you're not entirely sure whether the essential oil that you've got is going to be effective or not, or as effective as it might be. So that's one thing that I'm interested in. I'm also working on a project with a small business at the moment who approached me, and they are developing a new in-car aroma diffuser that they are hoping will lead to safer driving.
Oh, interesting.
So obviously, one of the biggest problems with when people are driving is getting tired at the wheel, performance slipping and leading to accidents and things like that. And so they've created 3 different aroma combinations that they want us to test, and a new diffuser system, in-car diffuser system as well. So we're going to be starting on that soon to see if these different aroma blends that they've come up with affect people's driving performance, and we'll use a virtual reality driving simulator that we've got to test that, because it's not the best thing to do in the real world to go testing driving ability in real cars. So we'll be doing that using a virtual reality driving simulator that we've got. So that's an interesting, again, nice applied piece of work. Now, I can't tell you what's in those aromas either, because I don't actually know what's in them, because it's all a bit hush-hush. They're secret blends that they don't want,
trade secrets.
They don't want to let it out and that sort of thing. But we'll be doing the assessments for them. Because we're always breathing, wherever we go, whatever we're doing, there's always an opportunity to see what effect aroma will have on that particular behaviour at any given time, because we're always doing it. It's always open to manipulation.
Very interesting. So I guess I'll be getting a rosemary tree for my office this year after this discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark Moss, for this lovely conversation we've had, for talking to us about your research. Where can people find you online and follow your research as these projects develop? Well,
the best way really to find me is simply through email. I'm probably the least active social media person in the world, but if people want to catch up with me about my research, I'm very good at responding to emails. So mark.moss@northumbria.ac.uk.
So if you'd like to learn more about Northumbria Psychology, check out our psychology department blog at northumbriapsy.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at NorthumbriaPSY. If you want, you can follow me on Twitter at Brown, GENAVEE. If you would like to be interviewed on the podcast or know someone who would, please email me at genevieve.brown@northumbria.ac.uk. Finally, if you liked the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your listening app and give us a review and rating. I hope you've learned something on this voyage into the mind. Take care until next time.